So Ben, Passover's coming up. I know you're very excited for that. And I've been working through my haroset recipe lately. I've been chopping up apples. I've been toasting walnuts. I've been mixing raisins together. But I'm having a really hard time getting the spices and the Manischewitz wine and all the ingredients. I mean, I try stirring it around, and I just can't quite get it. But you want to know what I've been doing lately? Super strong, right? You fold everything but the nuts there.
Very
Famous pun in the world award goes to me for this week. Hello, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Great job. Welcome to the latest installment of the Two Fish at the Table Poker Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Legend of Ben on PokerStars.
And I am your other host, East Coast Sam. Welcome to this very special episode. We're going to be talking about the second half of the 2015 World Series of Poker main event. We talked about the first 8 episodes last time. We'll be doing the rest this time.
Yeah, and we didn't really discuss this last time, but I feel like this is sort of the start of a new era of the main event, which really is focusing on the table talk, the characters, the big characters at the table during the poker. And the poker takes a slight step backwards, and it kind of is the sort of peak table talk era of the main event. So Justin Schwartz and Joe McKeehen, Daniel Negreanu kind of embody that sort of motif, and then later on, of course, we'll get some table talk of guys like Alex Keating, Will Kassouf, and John Hess to kind of continue that trend. And I was a little bit negative on the previous batch of episodes. I felt that it's kind of, I'm a big fan of Negreanu, so obviously it was great to watch this live on TV as it was airing, because I'm a big fan of him. But it's just more on retrospect. These hands of Negreanu, some of them are okay, like a couple of good hands of Day 5 of Negreanu, but they don't rank on my top 10 or top 15 favorite D-Neg hands of all time. That's the problem for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's some great table talk, not just from Negreanu, but also from Joe McKeehen, of all people, who I always sort of thought was sort of a more reticent guy, not so talkative at the table. We see a little bit at the final table of him talking, which was what I saw live back in 2015. But yeah, I mean, not so much in terms of, there's some good poker hands, and we'll get into that later. But yeah, D-Neg's not really his finest hour, especially on his last day of the coverage. I wish we'd seen a little bit more sort of, reading players' hands, and then, the bluffs that we used to see from him. But yeah, I mean, at this point, obviously as we're getting down to the latter stage of the tournament, we're going to see more advanced play. We're going to be seeing, both big stack bullying and sort of short stacks trying to make their way through. And I actually think we get a good mixture of the two. The big stacks playing these sort of more interesting hands, and the short stacks sort of trying to find their spots.
Yeah, tournament poker-wise, it's definitely a unique showcase, especially on day 7, which we'll get to. And I will say, I do think that the back half of this main event is a little bit stronger than the first half.
Yeah.
And again, a part of that is thanks to Daniel Negreanu's continued presence on the featured table.
Right, yeah.
And luckily, because of the rotating nature of the featured table, we will get a pretty solid taste of some more players, as well as a couple of highlighted players on the outer table coverage. So, it works out pretty good. So, getting right into things with the second half of the 2015 main event, episode 9, day 6, part 1. This is a special bonus length episode. Again, that's 69-minute length, and once again, Daniel Negreanu headlines the featured table, but we also get a very nice batch of characters with them. We get Max Steinberg, who had been kind of one of the most quiet behind-the-scenes edit chip leaders on day 5 you'll ever see. Justin Schwartz, who we only had just gotten a brief appetizer taste of earlier up to this point. Tom Canuli, who will make the final table as well with Steinberg, and as well as one Kelly Minkin. And so again, it's some pretty solid bunch of characters that will get a lot of fun table talk throughout all of day 6.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good mixture of players. And we kind of talked last time about how we didn't really like the whole grab bag approach, that we felt there was just spread a little too thin. But now that we've seen these players before, we also get a little bit of Pierre Neuville as well, sort of his talk when he's like at the table. Now that we've seen these players before, we get sort of a better sense of who their personalities are. They're fleshed out in more detail. And so it's a lot more interesting to see this time.
And as far as fleshing out characters, we kind of got this sort of schoolboy, schoolhouse crushing talk by the guys of Minkin, where they're kind of like trying to, not flirts per se, but just kind of, curry some favor from the ladies. Like you could argue before the action really began.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that before with women at the table, like with Kara Scott. All the guys are kind of just turning to her, and again, not flirting with her per se, but definitely giving her more attention than she would get if she were a man. It's just it's not quite cringe, it's not quite awkward, but it's a
kind of cringe.
little
It's kind of
off-putting.
halfway between the two. Yeah.
Yeah,
And Minkin does get some more attention when she ends up doubling in a pretty big flip
right.
pre-flop with two jacks against Ace King on the very first hand of the episode. So she goes from about a little over 2 million to about 4.25 million. So that makes her a big stack and a big player. Again, this
Yeah.
thing began with 69 players left, and so again, having a big stack at this point is huge for getting from day 6 into day 7.
Yeah. I mean, getting into the episode, yeah, I mean, it's an extended episode, which we spoke about before, and it's nice to see, I guess, a couple more hands to get a better sense of how the players are doing, but it's not super necessary. And I'd say the same thing here. I mean, we got a nice interview from Max Steinberg talking about his performance, how he's trying to just pick his spots and isn't getting too crazy. And we definitely see some, fairly solid play from him. I'd say that's throughout the episode. Canuli being just a really great guy. Like, you just hear him talking and, being around for 6 years and how he's, working hard and earned this spot. I mean, he definitely wears his heart on his sleeve, and it's very interesting to hear from him and see him play his game. But yeah, I mean, I just didn't feel it was super necessary to have it be this long.
I thought it was a decent episode. It just
Yeah.
didn't need to be this extended length time slot to air it. It is a very good Justin Schwartz, Minkin, and Canuli spotlight episode, because these three had not really been at any of the main tables up until this point, so that was great. But again, the highlight for me is just basically anytime Justin Schwartz is talking is absolutely fantastic. That's the real treat of this episode. So Justin Schwartz kind of guilty of a few poker faux pas, talking about just dumb stuff during hands, during a big pot. Negreanu actually gets a great line in when Schwartz is talking during the middle of a hand. He goes, I'm talking middle of big hand usually, just kind of like trying to have that little cutting comment on to Schwartz, his etiquette at that time. And this will be more apparent as the tournament goes on, but Schwartz is kind of like a super poker nerd. He's watched anything related to Max Steinberg or Donato Negreanu on TV, kind of in our ballpark, only we're far less, cringe than Justin Schwartz is. And so he's like, we'll bring up these hands, like, oh, I saw you do this on TV once and that. And then they kind of react kind of like with this sort of mild bemusement, but also annoyance to these kind of comments too. So
Yeah.
they mentioned Max Steinberg's Jack High call during the 2013 National Championship. And I will say again, one of my top favorite lines from Norm is, if Hilton had 2 traffic tickets, he had a better hand.
Yeah, I mean, I think my favorite line from him, and it's also a great edit as well, is when Justin Schwartz, I think he's talking to Max Steinberg. He goes, now that Justin Bono is out, you're the best in the field. And it cuts to Daniel just sort of sitting there, and he just has like a blank look on his face. And that's more editing than Justin Schwartz, but it's still just a really funny moment. Yeah, and when he's in a head with it's Steinberg, Negreanu, Minkin, and him, and right before the flop, he goes, 4 of the best. It's just such a weird thing to say at that moment.
Yeah. And again, Schwartz has his like black hoodie on. His hair is kind of gross. His teeth are kind of gross. It's just kind of this slimy, gross character that everyone kind of knew in high school at some point, So he's by far the most unique character of this entire main event.
Yeah.
Although I guess you could argue Neil Blumenfield on the other tables with his back-to-back doubling ups on Brian Hastings is also pretty memorable too, with his Silicon Valleying, with his acting during those hands. And again, this is kind of 2 of the hands that kind of got Neil's reputation of being kind of a bad player, just kind of being lucky to make it this long. But it's still pretty funny, and it will not be the last time we'll see him score back-to-back double-ups against the same player in very short succession. So
very true, yeah.
Otherwise, the rest of the episode, you have a repeat of the first timers bit where it focuses really on 4 guys: Holtz, Budaroni, Klinger, and Beckley. And so, again, it's a pretty good collection given how far they'll place in the tournament. But again, I just wasn't feeling this recurring bit as well as it was used in 2014. Same goes for the Side Action Championship, the kind of the pot. It just seems like the banter and the dynamic of the 4 players in that Side Action, which just wasn't quite as amusing or energetic as the last time they used it.
Yeah, I mean, I like Maria Ho a lot. I think she's a great poker commentator, very personable person, but there's just something about Mike and just his interactions with Phil and their history that's just so good. And, it's just lacking here a little bit.
Especially since they played the game Guess the Pot Size, and it was just so funny when Matisel ripped on Helmuth for his crossing off the better guess when they were counting the chips. So it doesn't work quite as well.
Yeah.
But again, it's a decent episode. Just could have been a little bit tighter, a little bit better with how long it was. But it does include of 55 players left out of the first out of 69. And they did a pretty good job of showing each bust out in the episode kind of numerically. They don't always do that at this phase of the tournament. So that was good to see too.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I think the next episode actually a little bit better, a little bit stronger. It's not as long. It's a regular length episode. After we're down to at this point 55 players, which accounts for 7 tables.
Mm-hmm.
Really getting down there. There's still some great more Justin Schwartz talk about like Airbnb and like how do you not know about Airbnb, or just some funny little stuff like that. And Schwartz kind of needles Max Steinberg for not putting him to the test of a big like river bet / bluff. He's 0 for 2 putting him to the test, and he even kind of gives the tournament director a hard time when he tells him to not announce the cards when he's in position in the middle of the hand. So again, some pretty good stuff from Schwartz.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just when is the time coming, Steinberg? Like he's just constantly bantering with Max, almost as though he's trying to like seek his approval or equal him as a pair, which is, I mean, Steinberg had won a bracelet by this point. He's, obviously one of the better players in the field, and Schwartz, had won some tournaments before, but wasn't like a super big name or anything. So it's just kind of awkward to see this almost like little brother, big brother sort of pairing there. And you also didn't mention Mr. Mark Kroon appearing with one of the funniest like hands just ever, just for like one gesture that Mark Kroon does, this smile that he gives in the middle of this.
So epic. So Mark Kroon, it's involved with about 20 big blinds of ace-8 suited in a 3-way pot against Parman and Anton Morgenstern, of all people. And so the action goes raise or raise call. Kroon overshoves. Parman goes all in with kings. Morgenstern has 2 jacks, so a bit of a tough spot there. He stares at Kroon. Kroon has a stone face and goes, kind of like a staring contest, kind of breaking your composure on your face move. Just so epic of a move there, and it works technically because Morgenstern kind of folds, assuming one of them has to have at least ace king, which technically was true. Someone had ace king beat, and then Kroon hits a flush draw on the flop, and then of course binks the spade on the turn to double up, and finally have a solid stack here at this phase. And just very funny stuff. And then Kroon, some of his Norm Norm chimes in. I never said it getting good. You never do. That's why we love you.
It's a great moment. Yeah, I mean, Kroon, obviously had the big blow up a couple of years prior, which they kept mentioning, multiple times, which is their right, of course. But it's just nice to sort of see Kroon be, a little more personable at the table, a little bit more friendlier. Yeah, I mean, it's fun to see him sort of do things. We get a lot of hands in this episode that we don't get the full treatment on. We either have it post-turn or post-flop, which is okay if you want to save some time, but I would like to see the full action for it, or at least have Lon or Norm sort of talk about it. So, yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a grab bag episode. Again, we see some moves from Beckley. Beckley does double up at the end. We see Klinger, who sort of the more excitable amateur of the field. He actually starts the episode off clutching a microphone for whatever reason and doubling up. So good on him, even if he's not like a great player. But yeah, I mean, I would have liked a little bit more of a focus in this episode, I think.
Well, the thing is, there were a lot of really good action flops actually in this episode. So that's kind of fun. And there's actually a pretty strong, just purely poker focus. There's only one interview bit the entire episode and no like side bits or anything. So it's really just focusing entirely on the action. No filler really. It's just kind of poker. There's some great hands. Brian Hastings has 5.5 million chips like vanished with his kings against aces. And then a very unique kind of announcing of the hand by Lon and Norm. The hands play themselves. I wonder if cards announce themselves, and they both chime in, nah! That's kind of cool. And so again, with this episode concludes with 45 players left, so that's the final 5 table. So again, really getting into the nitty gritty. So for me, I thought it was pretty solid. Again, some good Justin Schwartz quotes and some solid poker runouts and crazy hands. So I don't know. I liked it maybe more than you, but that's okay.
Well, whatever this is.
Very well. Very good. And then, so the second half of day 6 is, again, another supersized length episode. Unfortunately, Minkin gets moved to an outer table.
Yeah.
So just by virtue of the tables consolidating and stuff, even though everybody else stays at the table, which is strange because you would think that as tables shrink, you would either have a table fully break or you'd have just the empty spots fill up. So
yeah.
I'm not really sure how that worked out. But as a result of the table redistribution, we still have Negreanu, Canuli, Steinberg, Schwartz, but we get George McDonald and Blumenfield to join the table instead. And so again, kind of a repeat where Schwartz I have a list of all of his quotes from this episode. And again, Schwartz at this point is maintaining a solid chip stack. He's not really losing any big hands. He's gradually, average to above average stack hand by hand. So he's staying relevant, much to the table's discontent. And Blumenfield does kind of do some more kind of, as Norman Lawn referred to as lawn home game bluff show, lawn home game moves with some kind of silly all-ins of sorts.
Yeah, but he also makes some great moves against Amar, who's another amateur, and gets quite a bit of coverage in this episode. With Queen Jack against Amar, Ace Deuce, manages to sort of read him well and does a great river shove to get him off the hand. Blumenfield up to this point has been sort of established as, a bit of a crazy amateur, gets lucky here and there, but this is sort of where we start to see him break out a little bit and show some talent.
Yeah, and whereas I felt that the first 2 episodes, my favorite stuff was kind of the table 1 stuff, dynamics. I think the outer tables finally kind of shine in this episode.
Yeah,
the length, we get a great sort of coverage of a lot of the outer tables. Budaroni, Turiansky, De Silva, and Kroon all kind of getting involved in the edit. So. Turiansky kind of gets a little salty with Budaroni, calling the clock on Budaroni for his lengthy tanks, I guess. And it kind of has one of those kind of salty, I'm angry at you in the poker table kind of conversation, which is always funny for me to watch.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Some players do bust. So guys like De Silva, despite hitting a lucky 4-outer against Mark Kroon, he does meet his tournament end. Kroon does bust to Minkin. Kroon never really able to get too much going on day 6 after that one double up against Parman.
Yeah.
Ernie Klinger, one of our first timers, does bust. So that kind of leaves us with 3 kind of main first timers, that being Holtz, Budaroni, and Beckley. And Budaroni, on that note, does flop quads and just can only shout, "Whoa! Whoa!" Very energetic, exuberant kind of guy at the table.
Yeah, it's a great little moment from him. And it's not like super disruptive or anything. Like he's allowed to be excited, so that's what makes it so nice for me. But I think the highlight in terms of speech has to be Mr. Justin Schwartz, who's not even involved in this hand with Max Steinberg versus Toole, where, going over the action, so Steinberg has kings. Canuli calls with pocket 9s. Toole calls with king 10. So the flop comes out. Toole has top pair. Canuli bets out for 400K. Toole calls. Steinberg raises to 1.25. Toole then shoves over him. So Steinberg tanks for a moment. We don't quite know how long in the episode. I think it was, a few seconds. Then he calls, and Schwartz is furious at him. He goes, "Did you really just nit roll? You deserve to get sucked out. My friends would make fun of you." Just
berating me, yeah.
Just such a crazy, crazy spot, and Toole busts. But, I don't even think Steinberg did anything wrong there. Think about it for a moment. He's a more deliberate player. It's such a weird moment.
Yeah, it's weird, but, he's just trying to the episode before, Lon had mentioned that George had said that everything he says at the table is intentional and calculated, which I can kind of see for some of it, but some of it I don't believe that for anything. But it's just kind of amusing stuff. Again, I love the Schwartz specimen on display here, and this petri dish of poker is just so bizarre. And
it really is.
I eat it up. Pretty strong.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then Patrick Kearney, who I swear looks like the main character from the old video game Second Sight, busts 2 players as the episode ends. I don't think you know that game.
Yeah, I don't know the
game. Look at it later, you'll agree with me. And he busts Klinger and Hein and as the episode ends, so kind of a concluding kind of explosion of action as the episode concludes, and with just 32 players left. So again, just 5 spots away from making it to day 7, the last day before the final table. So you would think with 32 players left, Lincoln's got a very solid stack. There's no way she's not making it to the final day of the tournament, right? She's going to pull a Gail Bowman or Elizabeth Hill, get to the final day, and just kind of cruise from there, right?
All I got to say about that, the fall of Kelly Minkin is this episode.
So the episode 12, the last part of day 6, has 31 players left. They actually kind of edited out one elimination in between episodes there for some reason. We have 4 tables left. And actually, to my surprise, we get a pretty solid sense of each table, even though one's not given like a full table roster of players and chip stacks and stuff like they would on day 7 usually. You get a pretty solid taste of each one because it kind of cuts to each one pretty evenly. And so that's pretty nice. Table 1 kind of starts things off with Canuli and Dan Negreanu discussing Schwartz after he briefly steps away from the table, kind of like saying, like, he changes the whole dynamic of the table. It sucks, but what can you do? It's kind of funny to see after all of this day 6 nonsense, they're finally kind of reflecting on this weird guy named Justin Schwartz, Stealth Monk, as day 6 is winding down.
Yeah, I mean, it's not super rude, but it's definitely, I mean, Schwartz says that everything he says at the table is deliberate. He's definitely rattling these guys. You know, imagine if he's watching that clip on ESPN, he feels proud of himself. I mean,
it's not just that he's rattling them, it's also that he's just annoying them. Like, he's like, if they talk, he'll like respond to them. So that he's kind of like trying to bait them. So they're kind of stuck in this catch-22 of they can't just be jovial at the table. They have to kind of, you know, weigh the pros and cons of saying anything in Justin Schwartz vicinity. So it's
absolutely
funny. And then the other tables, I just wrote in my notes for other tables, Minkin Sinkin. Trying to.
Yeah, I mean, she gets. Yeah, I mean, there's just a few spots where, you know, Morgenstern makes a flush against her and Minkin calls, and just a couple spots where you just need to get away from the hand and move on. I mean, I mean, with 7 deuce, she raises, Turiansky raises over her, so she has to fold. I mean, there's a bunch of spots where you just need to just move on to the next hand, keep your money.
Because after Minkin had busted Mark Kroon earlier on day 6, she had about 9 million chips, and then we kind of see her down to like 7 million when this episode begins, so a little bit kind of cut out in between, and then she just kind of takes hit after hit after hit until she ultimately busts in an awkwardly edited hand, because we see the hand from the flop onward where it had been limped, so then Lon has to kind of chime in, but she had seen the flop for free from the big blind, so that's why she had 10-4. That's why she was even in the hand in the first place.
Yeah.
Where she makes trips but gets outkicked by Budaroni's better trips with I think an ace kicker in that case. So she busts just shy of making it to day 7, and once news of her bust hits the whole room, all of a sudden Schwartz turns in, Minkin lost? No. Which I think was actually kind of genuine, ironically.
Yeah, I think so.
Despite his character, I think he was hoping actually to maybe bust her later in the tournament.
Perhaps, yeah. I mean, it's an interesting dynamic to say.
And ironically, despite the fact that we begin with 31 players, there were 0 bust outs in the first 33 minutes of this episode. So they really were. It's not really a page up bubble or anything, or just kind of a lull in the action bubble. For the tournament. So that was a unique sort of dynamic of day 6 with that.
Yeah, I mean, they do spend a lot of time toward the beginning sort of building the characters. There's a sort of segment where everyone's talking about, like, what would you do if you won $7.7 million? Everybody would buy a house. And then finally we get to learn more about the man in the fedora himself, Mr. Blumenfield, who is pretty much just the personification of, like, a cool Southern California, like, hipster uncle guy. Like, he makes beer at home. He owns parrots. Like, it's just like he's a cool guy, like, you know, by no means, but he's also just such a hipster. It's not even funny. It's great.
And so, you know, the takeaway from day 6 here is that Negreanu, Canuli, Schwartz all, you know, chip up very steadily, do a good job maintaining chips. Steinberg kind of plummets a little bit towards day 6 ends. And Patrick Kearney is kind of the chip leader for the end parts of this day. And so all in all, I mean, it's an okay batch of day 6 episodes. Without Justin Schwartz, it'd be definitely a letdown, but I can't just dismiss the endless quotable and notable actions of Stealth Monk when evaluating these episodes.
Yeah, I mean, these episodes, we get a good sense of who the big players are and how they're playing. McKeehen ends the day 4th in chips with 12 million. So Kearney's got 14.4. So he's behind Kearney, but not by very much. We also have Negreanu ending the day at 8.5 million in 9th place, and then Schwartz at 7.5 million. So, they're all doing fairly well. We have a good sense of who they are as players, which is nice. I just would have, maybe liked, a little bit less of the side segments, a little bit more of the action from the players who are going to make the final table.
But to be fair, there are some pretty solid hands intermixed here. So it's not by no means a loss of time or anything. It's just,
absolutely.
Again, Negreanu and Schwartz rule the world here. So
of course, yeah.
As episode 13 begins, this is day 7, part 1. Again, another supersized length episode, and it covers a lot of ground. Actually, it spans 3 blind levels, 60K, 120K, up until 100K, 200K, and takes us from 27 players down to 20.
Yeah,
and by the luck of the gods, we once again have Negreanu, Schwartz, Canuli, and Steinberg all at the featured main table, unbelievably. And at the other table, we get all 3 tables are shown. So we see 999, and we see every player left in the tournament. Some we have not seen in the slightest up until this point, and many that we've seen through the first few days of the tournament.
And in addition, we have Buderoni at the feature table. And I think the most heartwarming part of the World Series for me is just how well Negreanu and Buderoni get along. They just hit it off right away, and they're best buddies, and their banter is really good. It's just very sweet to see all these moments between these two. Buderoni's clearly very, very happy to have Negreanu there with him. I think he even asked Negreanu, "Can I touch you at some point?" Which, that's what people do. I mean, this was a pretty good episode. I like this one a lot. I've mentioned in the past how final 3 tables, there's just so much natural tension, but we really get to see a lot of different stuff here, and I really like it.
So I thought it was a decent episode, but marred down by just a ton of slow filler. There's so many, there's a lot of flashbacks, montages of old stuff that we'd already seen that really kind of bugged me. So if this had been a 45-minute episode, it would have been pretty darn perfect, but because of that extra 20 minutes of filler, it felt like it really kind of weighs things down. But there is some good action at each table. We kind of see some mini meltdowns, a mini mountain meltdown by Morgenstern, where he kind of just, even though he had fewer chips in 2013, he just kind of really just blows it. The hand he actually busts on, it's kind of emblematic of when Lon goes back to Morgenstern of this funny voice, because of how busy this hand is pre-flop, and Morgenstern has pocket 10s, right? So he doesn't have to play his hand like that. He can fold and live to see another day, but he can't do it. And Morgenstern ends up busting in a hand that's a big win for Beckley. As he hits a nice hand there.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's kind of, and then also at that same table we get the back-to-back hand doublings of Neil Blumenfield against John Allen Hines. So Hines had a pretty big stack, about 13 million or so, and he ends up giving 2 very quick, unglamorous double ups to Blumenfield with hands the first hand is ace king against kings. I don't blame him as much. Blumenfield only had about 3 million chips, so it wasn't a ton of big blinds, so I could understand. But then the very next hand, he overplays pocket 10s for more than 3/4 of his stack, and so just overdoing it. Clearly, you have to reset your head when the next hand happens. You can't just assume, because I have a good hand again, I'm going to be ahead. So
quite right, yeah.
And table 2 also has a huge hand with Pierre Neuville against Mario Sequeira, where of course Norm has to chime in. He makes this call with a large prostate. Come on, Norm, you're not that much younger than him. You're going to have that prostate problem pretty soon too. I mean, come on.
With, I think, one of my favorite celebrations, because Neuville, hasn't been smoking that much, but when he wins the hand, he goes, yeah, and he like kind of like pauses with his like fist in the air. It's like such a very odd gesture.
Luca was a very like almost Mr. Bean kind of quirky, silent, funny kind of guy. His facial expressions are great. His gestures are great. So I really appreciate a lot of that of Newville. At
Yeah.
the featured table, again, there's some pretty good stuff there too. As Schwartz does some very inappropriate table talk with, while Buoteroni and Negreanu are kind of doing their back and forth in the middle of a hand on the river, where Negreanu kind of does that. You can't beat it. It's a good hand. You can't beat it. That's why you wouldn't you ask it? And then Schwartz chimes in, "I'll be raising you now. That's my goal. But the nuts, right?" And then Negreanu has to chime in. You just can't say that. You just can't say that. And then because like action, I would have. You can't. I don't talk about what I would do as somebody like just over the line for sure for Schwartz there. But even though Buoteroni does lose that hand to Negreanu, he does make up for it with a very loud and crazy double up, hitting a 2-outer against Stefanski, who had been the chip winner when that table when day began. And so Stefanski kind of has a nightmarish start to the day. And of course, we get the Buoteroni catchphrase, "Wow!"
Yeah, and then another really sweet segment from Tom Canuli talking about his dad owning an ice cream parlor and just being a competitive person. He's just such a sweet guy. I really like him. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good character moments here where we're starting to see with Newville's celebration, with the Canuli moment, with Buoteroni again celebrating. We're starting to sort of really see these guys get a little more focused. And Negreanu gets so much attention, you'd think he'd make it, right?
Mm-hmm. And then on table 3, probably the least shown of these tables for the episode, Peter Holtz just gets super unlucky against the same guy.
Yeah.
So he doubles up Kramer, but that actually had been Kramer's second double up against Fedor Holtz that day. One was shown off screen. I was checking the blog. So Fedor did not do anything wrong, really. He just 3 straight hands goes from, relatively below average stack, but 2 outs in pretty short order, though. But he does take it in pretty good stride when he's wearing this like kind of leather jacket that he wore on day 6 also. And he just kind of has, once he busts, he kind of immediately does like a bow and like handshake move with that. Just a kind of a classy exit for Holtz.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, if Holtz is such a talented player that if he makes the final table, I mean, the final table is just going to be so different. They obviously got lucky that he busted as early as he did.
Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't really do anything wrong. It just didn't Carson go his way.
I had a good 7 bullet points of solid hand notes for his episode, which is very good. But again, a lot of filler flashbacks. Those immediate flashbacks where they cut right back to the hand they just showed, or from one episode, just really, really irked me, especially when you're watching this episode in such, binge sort of watching pattern.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on that. It didn't bother me too much. I think it's just the highlights of, the celebrations and the table talk and all that sort of just lift this episode up for me.
Mm-hmm. And then even though John Allen Hines was shown in those 2 hands doubling up Blumenfield, he's actually not shown busting in the next episode. We just begin with 19 left. So his elimination's completely expunged from the edit, which I could not believe because this is day 7. You should be showing each elimination. It just did not work to me for that. But so with that, there's a very sort of quick section of the episode that is of the 3 tables going down from 19 players down to 18 players.
Mm-hmm.
And so at this point, Newville has 26 million chips because Sequeira had a lot of chips to dump to him.
Right.
Newville, in the chip lead. Negreanu, again, below the median of the pack in 14th place. But before we get from the final 3 tables down to the final 2, we have, again, one of the most memorable hands of the entire main event, a la Buoteroni and Justin Schwartz.
Crazy hand. I mean, Peters gets mixed up in this one too, but Buoteroni raises to 455 with pocket jacks. Schwartz, because he has 9 deuce, he's got a raise, I guess, so he raises it to 1.55 million. Buoteroni calls. Schwartz hits bottom pair, so he bets out 1.2 on the flop. Buoteroni calls, check 2x. Then Schwartz leads out for 2.8 million, and Buoteroni stews for a little while. Tight spot. I mean, you can imagine stewing there. And then Schwartz calls the clock, and everybody at the table, I mean, everybody, the amateurs, the pros alike, are like, that's out of line. That wasn't enough time.
Well, you can just literally see in Max Steinberg's face, because this is a culmination of all the Schwartz nonsense, including, he was not really out of line on day 6, technically, rules-wise or etiquette-wise, like poker etiquette-wise.
Yeah.
Etiquette-wise, yes, poker etiquette, no. It's really kind of, you can just see his disgust, like, because and Buddharon's a nice guy. It's like, you clearly they're on, Team Buddharoni versus compared to Schwartz, but even just by personality standpoints, they're really into Buddharoni's jovial exuberance, youthful energy. So they're just disgusted at it. Even Buddharoni chimes in, "Thank you, Max, for agreeing, for chiming in." Like, that was quick, and Negreanu's not happy about it. And then Max sort of lays out the lay of the land in that, it's like how long you give somebody is kind of dependent on what stage in the tournament you're in. Like 2 minutes,
Right.
2 days ago is, a fair thought process on how long to give somebody. Where on day 7, 19 players left for playing for $7.5 million. You really don't want to short anybody time. And while he's kind of, all locked up, Schwartz kind of says, "Seems like it to me," when someone's comments on how long it's been for the tank by Buddharoni. And of course, unfortunately, Buddharoni, it's a tough spot for, it's about a third of his chips to call. He's got jacks as overcards, the board's paired. Schwartz kind of had a tight image as well, so it's really hard to put him on 9 deuce or even just a bluff at that point. So he does fold. And of course, when Schwartz tables his cards, he turns them over, like flex them in, like just starts slipping. Now we don't hear what he actually says. It's bleeped because of his swearing, but he says, "I can't be stared at for 5 minutes." And then he tries to defend himself to Max. Like, he's like, "Max, I can't stand myself for 10 minutes." Like, not the Buddharoni. Wait till Max that for. I mean, come on.
Because it's got this like weird, again, big brother, little brother dynamic where he's like constantly looking for Max's approval. And of course, Max has like no real relationship to him. So he's just kind of deflecting. And also, like, when he turns his card, he's like, "Make me sweat." Like, he's just like kind of like almost bragging about it as he's turning the cards over, which is just, it's just gross.
Ironically,
gross hand.
Much as I was noticed before, is that the worldsofthepoker.com blog doesn't reference any of this table talk or anything in the blog post for this hand.
Really?
It just literally just says the action, and there's no subjective inflection on the writing of it. So they also weren't proud of this hand. They wanted to scratch from the record of the world, and obviously the episode is gonna allow that. But nonetheless, it's bizarre considering they did the same treatment to Henry Van Tran's hand against Kuhn in 2012. So there's really some conspiracy to avoid highlighting these sort of toxic or unusual behaviors during hands.
Yeah, it is odd, isn't it?
Yeah. And I should mention that you could actually go to the worldsofpoker.com blog, and it will record every single hand, including the hand number for all of these final 3 tables on day 7. They actually did a hand count. Every single hand is accounted for. And it's important because it does show you how many hands compared to the other tables are being played. So if one table had slower players, they're obviously playing fewer hands, and it would change the overall dynamic and flow of that table during the rest of that day. So
interesting, yeah.
But Kearney does bust Murphy in 19th place to get us to the final 18 or 2 tables. And again, the table draw for the final 2 tables is perhaps the most important table draw gameplay-wise in the history of the main events.
Yeah, of course.
It pits Schwartz, Negreanu, and McKeehen all at the same table on table 1, and it puts a lot of the Maniac players on table 2 together. So a very different contrast, and the chip distribution will obviously reflect that as the action progresses, and it's going to be interesting, to say the least.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. But the other bust outs in this episode are really kind of the players we know nothing about. I mean, Negreanu does bust Peters, who we kind of knew from 2012 a little bit from his time on the same table as Robert Salaburu. But kind of the people given the least edits up until this point kind of bust, which is a shame. But at the same time, it did mean that we're spending more time on the folks that kind of matter in the grand scheme of things. So it's kind of a give and take there for that to really make sense.
Yeah, and I mean, it just gets us down to the final 16 where we can, really sort of start to see the tension in the room thicken, and we know so many of these players already, so there's a little bit more tension involved seeing them face off against each other.
Yeah, especially since usually, they like to evenly break down the final 3 tables to the final 2 and half of the day 7 coverage.
Right.
Because we end with 16, for those final 7 bust outs, we get 2 full episodes instead of having to cover the final 9 bust outs to account for that. The other major hand in this episode, I would say, is the big Daniel Negreanu cold 4 ace king laydown against McKehen's aces.
Right.
Negreanu somehow manages to fold ace king against McKehen's. I think it was like a 5 bet all in with aces. Negreanu did have him covered at that point, but it would have been for probably like 80-90% of his chips. So he makes the right fold. McKeehen this is the last time McKeehen has fewer chips than Negreanu in the whole tournament, sadly. And it's kind of the starting point of his rise, where ironically a lot of that chip accumulation was skipped over in the edit. So he kind of goes from having 10 million before he shoves against Negreanu up to like 26 million before we really see a lot of that accumulation.
Yeah, it is interesting to see his sort of reputation build up through time. And, we sort of see him pop up out of the coverage here and there. But now we sort of finally see him as a presence, ending the episode with 27 million. Stern is second with 23.9. So McKehen's by no means the runaway chip leader yet, but he's definitely on top now. I mean, it is worth noting. So it's McKeehen 27, Stern 23.9, Neuville 23.8. Turiansky's fourth. He's at 16.4. So it's very top heavy at this point, which I think we've commented on before. But yeah, really from this point onward, it's going to be very top heavy.
And then episode 15 is day 7, part 3, covering 2 of the levels of the tournament. And it's, again, a supersized episode, but this is probably the best supersized episode of the bunch. This is really the shit hits the fan, the real gets real, and some crazy memorable hands, some shocking bust outs, really kind of everything you can ask for in a final 15 or 16 players down to the final table sort of action. So right off the bat, again, remembering we have 2 tables left, and they're balancing out these tables. So because of the uneven bust outs of the tables, George McDonald will actually move tables to table 2, which is very important for the ultimate run out of the elimination. So
Sure.
The McKehen's table mates are really kind of trapped at that first table. They kind of, as McKehen continues to climb there, and they get short, McKehen kind of just raise every single hand, and it really handcuffs what you can do when you're factoring in ICM, the pay jumps, trying to just get to that final 9. There's just so much value that players place in the making the final 9. Even if you bust out 9th, there's still value there as a poker player, as a person, as a celebrity, etc. So that's also very big. So, but again, possibly among my favorite Justin Schwartz quotes in this entire season has to be in a great hand between Josh Beckley and Alex Turiansky. So Beckley gets it all in with the straights. Turiansky calls a top 2 pair. Both of their hands are suited. They're the same suit. So when the cards go on their back, as many players often do, they'll mention like backdoor draws or sort of the scare cards, and Justin Schwartz has to chime in. He's got backdoor hearts, and then Joe McKeehen chimes in. He's got buckets to the straight flush. Joe Schwartz replies, "I just noticed that. Thanks for pointing it out." "Welcome, buddy," says Joe. So it's just the first time really someone kind of gives Schwartz some lip back, and it just the flow of it. I don't give it justice by the way I said it, but it's just, for me, it's a micro comedy moment I just love.
Yeah, I mean, it's the tone. It's just because I can't replicate it if I try, but just the way Joe McKeehen goes, "You're welcome, buddy." Just like flat, sarcastic, just so good. And they're not on camera. You hear this all off camera, so you don't see the facial expressions or whatever. It's a great, like, there's this TV trope funny background event where you notice something in the background that's like funny and you don't see it in the foreground. It's just one of those perfect funny background events of this. It's just so good.
And Turiansky, again, had a very solid stack, had been maintaining his chip stack. He takes a pretty big blow to Beckley here, and it's kind of a sign of things to come for him. He'll pretty much not be shown winning a hand the rest of the tournament.
Yeah.
Hopefully. And but Turiansky, by the way, looks so much more badass with shades on without the shades on.
Yeah, absolutely.
As is often the case, just his intimidation factor just drops substantially without the shades on.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's some really good tabletop between Joe McKeehen and Daniel Negreanu, because Joe, he's got talking chips, and Negreanu always has talking chips. So they're just kind of really talking, and really the rest of the table is pretty quiet besides Schwartz here and there. So it's a very unique sort of dynamic for the whole table. And then there's one hand where Negreanu is discussing an earlier action where he said, like, I called, and then Schwartz said, you should be careful. And then Negreanu repeats himself, I said, I called, like emphasizing the D. But again, I understand why Schwartz said that, because his etiquette's under attack, so why not attack other folks' etiquette at the same time with our table talk?
Yeah, and I mean, Schwartz calls his shot during that hand and says he'll be there in November. Like, it's wow, like what a guy. That's just all I'm gonna say about that.
And so as McKeehen continues to accumulate chips, he ends up with more chips than the rest of the table combined.
Yeah.
Which would not have been the case on table two. Table two had a couple of very big stacks. You had guys like Stern, Newville, even Steinberg and Blumenfield were accumulating chips too. So there was a lot of action on both tables, really, but kind of a different types of final two table action. If you had swapped one player from each table, it would have changed the whole tournament.
Absolutely.
And so this episode goes from 15 players down to 11. So we lose. I must not skip over this. We got two of the most shocking bust outs of all time. We have Justin Schwartz, Alex Troyansky, and McKeehen playing in a hand of three pocket pairs, threes, queens, and sixes. The flop comes 2, 3, 6, and I think this hand is worthy of us breaking down entirely, because
absolutely,
Justin Schwartz totally misplays this hand.
Right. So Schwartz limps in with the threes. Troyansky's got pocket queens, so he makes it 650. McKeon's got sixes. He's yet to act, so he calls, and then Schwartz decides to call. The board comes up 2, 3, 6, just like you said. Troyansky, totally fine play, makes it 700. And then McKeehen calls, and Schwartz, with 9.5 million, shoves all in with his set.
The blinds, I believe, are 120K and 240K. So about 9 million plus amounts to close to almost 40 big blinds, really. So, and so the flop did have 2 diamonds on it.
Right.
So, but obviously with middle set, you're not afraid of 5-4. And again, even if they have 5-4, you do technically have outs for a full house. So it's, again, not really on, and again, only Joe could have 5-4, and even then I'm not convinced he could. And so Troyansky makes a great fold. Are you frozen, Sam? Oh, we're frozen. Oh, are you back? I was frozen there for a little bit.
Yeah, I was frozen too.
All right, we're back. All right, that's by 5 seconds. So, so again, Schwartz has about 40 big blinds. He goes all in. Troyansky does fold the queens after much deliberation. He says after the hand he was scared by Joe, which normally I wouldn't believe, but Joe had made a couple of big hands of 2 6s earlier. So
right,
that's kind of his hand. If you're going to give Joe, like, this card is, this hand is his hand. That's his hand on day 7 at the very least. And so from that, okay, Troyansky makes a great fold. Of course, Joe's going to call of the top set. But what I would have done differently as Schwartz is, I'm either going to make a smaller raise, maybe like 2.5 million, or I'm going to just flat.
Yeah, me too.
Because so I'm trying to think of what was the goal of that shove. I feel like the goal of that shove was either Troyansky calls up the queens, which could have happened if Joe had not been in the hand. It's very possible. Yeah. Or he's hoping Joe calls up like Jack 10 suited of a flush draw. That's really the only things I could think of that maybe he was pondering.
I mean, call with the queens and thinking that Joe has kings or aces, I guess. I don't know. I don't think Joe would play kings or aces like that. It's a bit of an odd spot. I just don't really get it.
Because, again, Joe had probably around like 30 million chips, so he has both players covered very easily. But, again, losing 10 million to that 30 million is pretty big. So, again, it's Schwartz clearly – maybe he puts Joe on like 7s, and maybe he puts Troyansky on over. I don't know. It's just a very odd play. And with like 15 players left, what are you thinking, man? If maybe if it goes fold to fold, you're basically wasting your set. You win a couple million, but you're trying to get over that hump and get to a comfortable chip stack for the final table. You're getting close, so it's just a bad play. I mean, it's a cooler. I'm not saying he should fold it. I'm just saying there's ways of losing in a cooler that are less disastrous than this version.
Yeah, I mean, the way that they present it in the episode, right before this hand, there's a hand between Schwartz and Buderoni where Buderoni raises him and Schwartz is, a little flustered. He says, "You're just mad at me, aren't you?" And then he folds. So it's almost as though in the episode they're trying to present it as though Schwartz was like tilting a little bit. But I mean, I don't know in real life how many hands there were between Schwartz and between that hand and this hand. I mean, that's clearly what the episode's kind of trying to get you to believe. But yeah, I mean, I think I would just, yeah, as you said, make a small raise or just call. I mean, why would you scare people away? Why if you read Turiansky as having queens or jacks, some sort of premium overpair, why would you scare them away like that?
Yeah, so bad play, and then as Schwartz, sees his fate, he makes the great line, "You better win the fucking tournament," which of course Joe will do, so it makes that line age all the better. And then, of course, the classic line, "I don't do handshakes, people," which I guess in COVID would make sense a bit more than 7 years ago, but nonetheless.
Yeah, Schwartz was ahead of his time. He wore a mask and he wouldn't shake hands. So there you go. And I mean, yeah, I mean, just they don't normally do this, follow the players out into the hallway, but they actually had like a camera crew sort of follow Schwartz out into the hallway as he's walking down, clearly grumbling. They don't show the whole thing, but like right as it cuts to him, he's like, "Yeah, I wasn't going to take a hand like that. You're correct. Your poker analysis is on point." And just keeps walking. It's such a weird moment.
Yeah, reminds me a little bit of Matt Affleck when he busted in a similar spot in the tournament where they kind of half followed him to the hallway. And so as Joe wins another huge chunk of chips, tables are compressing even further. The very next hand after Schwartz busts, though, is the hand where Daniel Negreanu cannot fold top pair against McKehen's kings. So when Negreanu says "must pay," Joe goes "kings." Negreanu can't believe it, and then as a result of that hit, Negreanu gets very short, but he ends up in a negotiation double up against Joe, where they're like negotiating which card should come next when they're in a flip of ace-7 against 4s. So Negreanu does double up there, and Negreanu kind of stuck in this short stack rut for the remainder of his stay in this main event. Buderoni does hit 16 million chips when he busts Matt Guan in a queens against aces cooler. And
right, yeah.
But when you consider that while that hand was happening, McDonald was tanking against Stern at the second table. So Buderoni actually has 16 million chips when we're down to 11 players.
Wow, okay.
So he actually, would chip down by over 10 million chips when playing from 11 down to 9. So he was really playing it tight to make it to the final table. So, but imagine if he had, maybe come out of his shell, but he could have actually maybe had some chips to play come November. So something important to note. But
absolutely, yeah.
We've just covered all of the table 1 action. There's just as much solid table 2 action at the same time, where Canuli gets lucky against Kearney to double up, and we kind of see a good shot of Canuli's all-star rail that includes guys like Antonio Sfondiari in his corner. So that's always kind of fun. Patrick Chan in a big double up against Newville, where Patrick does a almost very premature celebration where he flops a flush and then gets the ultimate scarecrow on the turn. So he kind of freezes in mid-place celebration when Newville hits a set on the turn, but he does double up to hit about like 13, 14 million. So again, kind of like Buderoni would kind of just kind of fold his way to the final 9 to, which is, you have to wonder if they had maybe come out of their shell more than they might have busted before Negreanu would have.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough spot. I mean, I'm a tight player too. If I'm in that spot where, I don't have a huge stack, but it's the final tables right there. I mean, I would play a little tighter and try to make my way to the final table. But yeah, I mean, you got to try to win the tournament too. I mean, how many opportunities are you going to be in the final 12 of the main event? I think you got to open up.
And then some crazy Stern action where he ends up in a 12-minute long hand between Steinberg and Stern, where Stern gives a couple million over to Max when Max has top 2 pair, and so that kind of solidifies Max's chip stack for the remainder of day 7. And then I have a little song for you. Poor McDonald had queen, E-I-E-I-O. Along came a donk, his name was Stern. E-I-E-I-O.
10-8. Let's go, buddy. 10-8 against
Now,
Queen.
now to table two's credit, they actually allowed McDonald to tank until after Guan had busted on table one, so that McDonald could at least move up a spot on the payouts. But McDonald had two queens and about, I think it was like 12 million chips. So had Stern's gambit not paid off, McDonald would have had a top three chip stack, and Stern would have been down to probably about 10 million chips. And he does flop the flush draw that he hits on the turn, kind of like Mark Kroon on day 6. And so that is a pretty heartbreaking bust out for McDonald, although there wasn't really much emotion to it because we hadn't really seen much of McDonald's journey up until that point.
Yeah.
So, but he seemed to be okay with it, considering how lucky he had gotten to survive to the final 12 of the main event in the first place. So I don't feel as heartbroken as I might have felt for someone like Scott Mahan on 2014, for example.
Yeah, I mean, he takes it well. He definitely does. He says he'll feel better later, but we don't really hear much from him again, so hopefully he's doing well. But yeah. I mean, that was a tough one. But
again, this is a very fun, tense, table talky, impactful episode that really utilized the entirety of its hour and a half long time slot, and it leaves us with 11 players left, with Negreanu, of course, being in 11th place, just trying to hang on and make it to that final table. And it always seems like the person out in 10th or 11th is the one I'm rooting for the most. So it's of course fated for this to happen the way this is year after year.
Oh yeah. Let's just get into it.
Yeah. So with on the last episode of day 7, again with 11 players left, 5 players on table 1, which is substantial because that really puts the pressure on the short stacks against McKeehen, and then 6 players on table 2. So really, this episode on table 1, it's lots of sort of shove folds, pre-flop, a lot of see a flop, go all in, okay, fold, okay, I take it down, that sort of stuff. And Negreanu kind of slowly chips up bit by bit here and there, getting top pair, going all in, inducing a fold, things like that. There's a pretty amazing fold by Josh Beckley, actually, against McKeehen, who, honestly, I feel like Beckley kind of played the best against McKeehen compared to anybody else in this whole tournament. He has top pair, McKeehen has races of garbage and makes a straight and then puts them all in. Somehow he manages to escape a fold of his last few million chips. And so again, some pretty impressive stuff by all parties involved in table 1.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is interesting how you say that Beckley played the best against McKeehen, because I do agree with you. And Beckley, we've mentioned, is sort of one of the first timers, one of the more quieter guys. You don't get he's not that there's anything wrong with the guy, he's just not super personable. Yeah. So it is kind of interesting to see his narrative, and him and McKeehen just sort of sewn at the hip throughout the whole main event, as we'll obviously see at the final table. But yeah, I mean, this is definitely, as Daniel's swan song, he gets a lot of attention. He does push-ups. There's an entire segment dedicated to have pretty much everyone loves him. All the remaining players in the tournament talk about how great he is. And there's another montage of McKeehen just bullying Daniel the whole time, and it's just so sick.
Well, it's such a unique dynamic of a table where you have one chipper just kind of pounding these short stacks, and again, of the 11 players left, these are basically the bottom 4 on the list, basically.
Right.
Chips, maybe Chan is down there a little bit too, but it's just something you don't see very often in the main event. You often see usually fairly balanced tables, and we don't usually see this much time dedicated to this small subsection of the whole tournament. So that makes it more unique all the same. And again, continuing his kind of mad streak from episodes prior, Stern kind of gives this reckless double up to Neil Blumenfield, where Blumenfield makes the nut flush, and Stern has a gut shot straight draw and an inferior flush draw. So when the cards go over, he's like, oh, I guess I have no outs. And that's a big portion of the chips that Blumenfield will have for the final table.
Very true, yeah.
But we got to get to it. Negreanu, he does bust out in a pretty brutal spot against McKeehen, where McKeehen raises with a suited jack 3 of all things. Negreanu has an ace in the big blind. He calls, flops an ace. Joe McKeehen flops a combo draw. The money goes in on the flop, and despite Joe picking up more outs on the turn, The whole crowd is rooting for Negreanu to just, if he wins his hand, he'll have about 13.7 million chips, which again is nothing too crazy, but that's about 33, 34 big blinds, and compared to the rest of table one, that's actually pretty substantial by comparison. So, and again, you could easily see a final table of Negreanu there if you complete this one double up. But sadly, Joe makes the straight on the river. Negreanu collapses on the floor, finishing in the exact same spot he did in 2001, 14 years prior. So he matches his best.
Yeah, it's rough. I mean, you can tell that he's trying to keep it together and that he really wants to make it. Yeah, it's just rough. It's a rough moment.
And I do feel like had he made the final table, he would have probably finished in seventh. I just have a gut feeling it would have been seventh again. It's always
perhaps seventh.
Yeah. Ivy finished in seventh. I feel like it probably would have been a stronger effect on the poker scene than Ivy's final table spot, because the final table, the number 9, was definitely a bit more real to the television world in 2015 compared to 2009, where it wasn't really broadcasted live on the main ESPN channel. So that would have been a big difference. But
yeah,
nonetheless, with Negreanu busting, they merged the two tables together. And so the final table bubble is actually 18 minutes of the episode, with Joe McKeehen at 60 million chips, Troyansky at 10th place in chips as it begins. And this phase of the tournament lasts 22 hands.
Yeah, so it's not too slow, is it?
It's kind of in that middle, because sometimes those bubbles are quick and sometimes it takes quite a while. And so, again, kind of in the middle. And it actually, things kind of start off pretty bad for Joe McKeehen. He kind of loses about 10 million chips as this portion goes. Steinberg shoves on him. Beckley doubles up through him. Troyansky tries to chop his way to the final table, because whenever he's all in, it seems like he's going to chop the pot. The first time he does, the second time he does bust in a flip to McKeehen, ace-king against queens, the classic confrontation that we just can't avoid. And
right.
Troyansky, I mean, he made some mistakes as the day 7 winded down, so that's kind of on him. But again, I'm not as heartbreaking a bubble as, say, a Velador, Mortensen, or Gail Bowman, so I didn't feel as bad for that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to say about this sort of final table bubble. They do one interesting thing, which is they have a segment about the money bubble at this point, which I thought was, I always liked seeing the money bubble, but I thought it was just kind of odd that they would put it there.
Yeah, it would have been much more appropriate for episode 1, really, just to kind of give us a taste of that, as it's more relevant and more recent compared to the action all the way at the bubble here. But when push comes to shove, the last 2 episodes are definitely one of my favorites as far as winding down the action to that final 9.
Absolutely.
This last one, it was a very unique spin on the 2 tables, the us and them. Oh my God, this table is being run over by one guy. This one's kind of all over the place. The gameplay dynamics changing entirely with the short-handed play really was something to watch.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
This is kind of where I think the decent, slightly forgettable quality of the earlier episodes kind of is overshadowed by a great finish. So that was good to see.
Absolutely, yeah. And we end with Joe McKeehen at 63.1 million chips, Stern at less than 30 million. So this is McKehen's to lose. And then Shannon Buderoni hovering at 6.2 million. So, I mean, just a crazy, crazy chip layout.
I mean, you have one super big stack, kind of Jamie Goldish. You have Stern is, again, there's a considerable gap between him and the 3rd place. So, again, it's a big stack, though. Just that McKeehen has more than what you normally would expect for the chip leader. And then you have 3 very strong stacks, Blumenfield, Newville, and Steinberg, all of 20 million, which is good for about 50 big blinds, which is, hey, that works for me. Then you have 2 kind of mediocre, middling stacks, Canuli, Beckley, and then obviously the 2 short stacks, Buderoni and Chan, who are side by side at the table next to McKeehen. So they're actually in a really interesting spot, because at the very least, they don't have the big stack directly on their left, but then you have the big stack on your right, so you can really kind of force you into some odd spots if they maybe shoves a button or 2 or something like that.
No, he would never do that.
No, I don't think so. And so the 2-part final table experience, we actually get a very appropriately supersized length episode for the first part of the final table. I think this is actually a very solid Fantail part one, very well balanced, giving each player some time to shine if they were, in a situation where they could receive such equal time. This Fantail was the first time where they broke down the whole table into three parts: 9
Right.
down to 6, 6 down to 3, 3 down to 1. So day 8, or the first part of the Fantail, was 72 hands long, and right off the bat, we get kind of a not nearly as fun or interesting introduction style of the players, just kind of a bare bones sort of presentation, which is fine, but not as fun as the couple of more recent ones that we had seen. And Max Steinberg had this habit of winning the very first hand of a day of this final table, so he takes the very first hand in short order, and then hand 2 is where things get bloody.
Yep, McKeehen shoves with ace-4, and then Patrick Chan calls with king-queen, and there goes Chan, who was the least characterized by far of the November Niners, really didn't have any moment whatsoever beside the flush against Newville, and even then, really not that much to write about. I mean, I understand, like, okay, he's going to bust on the second hand, but can you at least give us a segment to let us know who he was? Can you at least give us a couple of hands so we can see what his poker playing style was? We get so much from Budaroni, who busts an 8th. I understand he was a first timer, so there's that angle of it. But Chan, I mean, it's just an unknown quantity.
And most important note I saw is that when it's not quite as clear in the edit of the Fantail, but after Chan busts, he gets up, shakes the hand of, I think, Blumenfield on his left, and then refuses to shake Joe's hand. He just kind of like puts his hand like no, like he refuses, which is kind of weird because I don't think Chan should have any beef with Joe. I mean, he didn't even play with him for the majority of day 7. So what's the big deal about shaking the guy's hand that just busted you? I mean, just it's all in the fair sportsmanship, right?
Yeah, I mean, ace-4, like, yeah, of course you're going to shove there. That's not a bad play at all. I don't get that.
It's for less than 10% of his overall stack. And again, he's happy to get 2 folds. He's also happy to get a call if he's ahead, and he was. And even though it's kind of a flip situation, of course, Joe runs well and hits about 70 million chips. So again, the rich get richer.
Crazy.
And then sadly, I love this in the live version of this final table, not shown in the episodic version, but the next 4 hands, Blumenfield raises and wins all 4 hands. Either through 2 bets or 3 bets or 4 bets or whatever with some big hands. He chips up, about from 22 million up to about 30 million through those wins, and then that kind of gets a follow-up here as the next hand shown is Blumenfield and Z Stern, and kind of a garbage raise war, which you don't see too often in these foul tables, really, with garbage hands, that Neil ultimately wins.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame that we don't see more from Blumenfield because, I mean, he was sort of the guy that got lucky through the coverage. So to see him actually, mixing it up here, I'm glad that we got to see the stand against Stern. But I really I would have liked to have seen, like, maybe just a montage of him, raising and then, getting the folds.
Kind of like how Jacobson had in 2014 when they showed his shoves.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that would have been
nice to build him a little bit.
Yeah, and then so again, we get obviously in a 69-minute episode, there's a lot of hands shown. A lot of it is of equal balance of players. Everyone gets after Budaroni and Chan bust. So Budaroni busts on hand number 35, where he gets ace jack on the small blind against Joe's ace king. And unfortunately, the episode doesn't do justice to the live version of this when this happened live, because Esfandiari, of course, had joined Norman Lawn in the booth for this. So when Joe McKeehen goes all in, we see the cards pretty flop after they enter the pot. The cards are shown on the TV screen, and so when they see Budaroni pondering a call with McKeon's ace king visible on screen, they see Budaroni go all in, and then the commentaries go, he goes all in with ace jack, and they're just so deflated. So that was unfortunately that lost in the world of internet and television, no longer visible to watch that version of the Fantail, but good stuff. And then, of course, once again, McKeehen hits absolutely no adversity because he busts the first 3 players of the night in with usually either not an overwhelmingly dominated hand, but all 3 times the hand holds up or comes from behind and wins it.
Yeah, and playoff 7th place is Pierre Neuville, who he has a straight against Cannuli's flush. Just isn't really able to get anything going. I mean, he calls Blumenfield's big bet when Blumenfield has a boat. I mean, just a lot of just kind of cooler situations, but also spots where he could have gotten away from, especially in the hand against Blumenfield. You just have top pair. I think you got to just get away from it there. Yeah, I mean, just rough.
And Neuville has one of the lesser success showings in this final table. He began in 4th in chips and ends up going out in 7th when he gets flushed out by Joe's Jack 6 suited. But when Neuville busts, we kind of get this sort of informal halfway point episode sequence because as actually an episode, you kind of have an established halfway point in the broadcast. So that was kind of expected, but kind of odd because it was all considered one episode to begin with. But
right.
Nonetheless, again, the next day of the final table is after Neuville busts, so day 9, and that one lasted 71 hands. So a little bit, actually, so 1 hand shorter than day 8, but still on the shorter side of things, considering how long these final tables can stretch out. But once again, Steinberg wins the first hand of the night against Joe McKeehen, small little pot. He kind of gets an interrogation effect there, but it works out. And then the very next hand number 2 of this day, Cannuli in his circle of trust, circle of life rail falls with aces against Steinberg's 10s, which again is another pretty crushing all-in bust to see live. But I did like Steinberg's fist pump celebration in his seats. Like, yeah. He's pretty happy.
Yeah, it's a heartbreaking moment. I mean, like you say, circle of friends, like he's standing in like the alleyway or whatever, and he's got like his arms extended, holding on to his friends. And you can just look at his face when Steinberg hits the set, just like, oh, Cannuli's just devastated. Yeah, but I mean, he does take it well. Steinberg, he gives the fist pump, but nothing too over the top or anything. It's just a heartbreaking moment.
Ugh. Yeah. And then going forward a little bit further, we got a return of the crazy Zvi Stern, where he actually does a pretty similar move a la day 7, where he shoves 10-9 suited into the big blind of Josh Beckley, who wakes up with aces. And so Stern loses about, I want to say, 45% of his chips to Beckley. Right. And this was kind of the first time Beckley had any real kind of light at this table, because he had kind of been stuck in this 10 to 15 million chip range the entire time. So to finally get some chips going was huge for him. And Stern kind of never was the same after that, because he busts to Blumenfield just about 20 something hands later with ace jack into Blumenfield's ace king. Ace jack is clearly a cursed hand.
Yeah.
Every single time someone goes all in the fit, they lose to something else.
Yeah, and it's one of the weirdest hands. So Stern puts in 11.5 million. So he leaves it with like 300K behind or something. Yeah. Blumenfield shoves. Stern, for whatever reason, it's beyond me, has the remaining chips in his hand, and he's going to put them in, but he turns to the dealer and asks her what her name is, and he's he hasn't quite put the chips in. So obviously that's kind of forward motion. So Blumenfield turns his cards over thinking that he's called, and Joe's deal, he hasn't called yet. And then Stern finally puts the chips in. It's such a weird spot. I don't understand that.
And Blumenfield had been kind of quiet up but for a while after that original kind of action earlier in the table. So it was just for a large portion of his chips. But by winning that hand, it does get Blumenfield back over 30 million chips, which is a big deal for him. And the blinds are about, I think, 400K, 800K at this point. So
right, yeah.
Getting back into the swing of things. So we're down to 4 players. And then as a couple more hands here and there, we have Beckley making one of the best final 4 players left in the main event folds of all time. He folds jacks pre-flop to McKeon's queen. So Beckley clearly had some sort of read on McKeehen to make some amazing folds like that.
Yeah, I mean, he has McKeon's number a few times. I mean, earlier in this episode, he manages to pull a hand off against McKeehen. He really just, for whatever reason, just was able to take some chips off of him.
And one of the bits in this episode is Beckley discussing his recent weight loss, trying to get healthier, and he definitely looks a bit more svelte at the table and looks. He didn't look terrible in beforehand, but just obviously, a weight loss health journey in the right direction is always going to be good for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, he wins a big hand against Steinberg, which kind of cripples him, and then Steinberg shoves with that cursed hand ace jack into McKeon's ace queen and busts in fourth place. Which everybody thought that Steinberg, being the bracelet winner, was going to be the one to go after McKeon, and that didn't work out. So just couldn't really get anything going.
So, but overall, it's a pretty good episode considering that this table is kind of remembered as being kind of a boring, uneventful, kind of slow final
Yeah.
table. Stern was notoriously tanking after every decision on that first night of the final table before definitely improving his speeds on the second portion. There was not a single raise post flop by a player. Plenty of
Yeah.
pre-flop raising, of course, but at no point during this entire final table was there a raise after the flop, which tells you either just the hand distribution, the runouts, not really any crazy coolers that would warrant it, and also that players are just so mindful of having this one big chip leader and trying not to be the next one out because you didn't want to hurt your game ICM wise.
Yeah, that is interesting to note.
Yeah. So as this day 9 of the tournament ends, with day 10, we have 3 players left. Joe McKeehen, who up to 129 million chips, which is more than double the other 2 players combined somehow. Blumenfield at about 40 million, and Josh Beckley at 24 million. And so this final day of the tournament was only 41 hands. So compared to a lot of those final 3 battles we've seen, 2014, 2012, which was 100 plus hands, this is actually pretty short for both the final 3 and heads up play.
Yeah, and this is a very special episode for me because this is the part where I actually saw this live. So from now on, we're going to be able to see stuff where I actually saw it live and looking back at it. And I remember you telling me, like, you got to keep your eye on this guy, Blumenfield. He had all these crazy moves. I hadn't seen the first part of the final table. So I was really looking forward to seeing him play. And, I mean, I don't want to say he blew it, but,
I mean, I don't think he would have won heads up anyway. So the fact that he was second in chips to begin the day and went out in third is definitely a letdown. But Blumenfield, in the interview after he busted out with some reporters afterwards, he said he regretted one particular hand, which was the first hand shown in this episode, which is the Queen 8 bluff hand into McKeon's top pair. And you could just tell once that hand went against Blumenfield, it was going to be uphill for Joe and downhill for Neil the rest of the night.
I mean, it's just crazy.
Yeah. And now this episode, it was a very quick night of poker that this episode is based on. So there's not a ton of drama in these hands. It's just more trying just to show as many hands of Neil winning as possible, since he doesn't win very many hands during 300 play. And it's just kind of, this episode, it's not as fun as the previous episode because it's just mostly just Joe kind of ruling the roost here. But it is very emblematic of how the overall night did play out, because really they show about half of the hands that were played, and if you subtract the raise and takes, that's really most of the action of the night.
Yeah, I mean, the only time that McKeon's in any sort of trouble is up against Beckley when Beckley hits trips. But even then, he doesn't lose too much. It's just McKeon was just running everybody over. I mean, he just had this final table in the palm of his hand, really. I mean,
yeah, you're referring to hand number 162 of the final table. And that's really the only time Joe really gets unlucky.
Right.
Because otherwise, just smooth sailing. He just chips out steadily, loses the minimum, wins the maximum. And, I mean, it's a, Neil Blumenfield busts on hand number 172 of the whole table. So about 29 hands into 300 play with deuces into Joe's queens. Again, everything goes his way. No runners for Neil's deuces or anything. One of Joe's favorite things in a hand is when someone's all in, he will shout to his rail, "No runners," because he's running so good. This opponent can't make any runners at any point during their all-ins pre-flop. And then heads up play is just 11 minutes long.
Right.
I'm sorry, 11 hands long, the final 15 minutes of the episode. And Beckley was up to 35 million versus Joe's 155.6 million when heads up began. And again, it's just, Beckley does, get a couple of hands to go his way, but it's just kind of all Joe from the start of heads up play.
Yeah, I mean, nothing really to, talk about in terms of heads up, one of the sort of weaker heads ups. But again, that was really just because McKeehen just had so many chips and was running so well.
Yeah.
A couple little like nice table talk things like, we didn't really talk about how McKeehen, we mentioned it a couple times, McKehen's sort of interrogations with different players, him sort of talking out loud and little comments he makes to Josh every now and again, very amicable, but like right as heads up starts, he goes to Josh and goes, wire to wire sound good? Just like little things like that.
Yeah, I mean, Joe was the only player to really talk during hands. There was a little bit from other players in between hands, but Joe really the one trying to level things up. But he has all the chips, so he's allowed to talk all he wants, and it won't matter much. There was a nice little flashback showing of the times those two players almost busted at some point in the tournament. That was kind of cool because we don't really see that kind of thing before. But otherwise, I mean, Joe plays. I'm not even gonna say Joe plays lights out. I think that Jacobson played better than McKeehen did on his table, but Joe just didn't have to play amazing. He just had to play, above average, and he was going to win this tournament.
Yep, and then Beckley shoves with pocket fours, and McKeehen calls with ace 10. And even I remember watching this live, even as Fanieri goes, there's no way he's not going to hit an ace. And guess what? He didn't hit the ace, he hit the 10. And no runners, as you mentioned, he calls out to his rail, gives the thumbs up, calls out no runners, and the board checks out fine.
But Joe does say, if I win, stay there until I talk to Josh, because as is kind of customary, like Merson shoving his people aside, he wants to consolidate his vanquished foe. So props to Joe for doing that with Beckley.
Yeah, I thought that was a really nice gesture.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And so I think the other thing we haven't really referred to is I think that this final table had some pretty crappy pay jumps too. So
yes.
So ninth place was guaranteed just over $1 million, which is great. But then the first couple of pay jumps, just kind of pitiful pay jumps. I mean, it's like, come on, $96,000 for eighth place pay jump. Come on,
ridiculous.
Make it even 100.
Yeah.
This was still prior to the main event era where they would kind of round off the payouts for the final table. So it's kind of these messy, like $1,020. Like, what is that? Come on.
Yeah, I mean, I think they put it in like the bank or something. So it's kind of like how like Queen didn't get $8 million, he got $8,005,000 because it gained interest or whatever. I guess that's why they're doing. I guess that's why that's the case. I don't know, but it's very strange.
This is like a hard percent of the prize pool,
right?
Like 17.5% of the pay jump. Yeah. So anyway, so again, it's considered one of the most boring final tables of the number 9 era, maybe of the entire final table era of the main events on TV. But for what it was, they made a pretty good show of it. I mean,
yeah, I'm with you.
I certainly could have been worse. And again, a very, very evenly balanced edit for 7 out of 9 players because minus the 2 short stacks, everyone gets in multiple hands shown. So that was a good balance there.
Yeah, I thought it was a good balance as well. And, there were a couple little segments here and there where we heard Beckley talk about his juice cleanse and stuff. So it gives us a little bit more sense of the character. Blumenfield started talking about how he appreciated not being talked about, sort of seen as like one of the weaker players at the table. So he could build a sort of name for himself. So that was kind of interesting. But yeah, I mean, I thought overall, yeah, this was a sort of good blend of hands. Not too much time wasted.
Especially since we don't have any dramatic like 2 outers or back and forth hands a la Grinder and Jarvis. Something. Consider all those factors. Considering just what they had to work with, they did a pretty good job.
Yeah, I thought so too.
And that's all you can ask for. I remember I actually was not able to watch this final table part 2 or the last part of it live, so I had to watch it on YouTube. And I saw how short the YouTube video clip was. I was like, oh, well, I guess Joe wins it pretty quickly because there's no way they're going to double up 4 times in a row and win it. So
right.
It was kind of I lost the surprise factor, I guess, but nonetheless, it's still one of the more memorable, like one of the most memorable, boring portions of poker history of all time.
Absolutely.
So that concludes this look back on this main event. Overall, again, it ends very strong. It just kind of bumbles along, and that's kind of 5 or 6 out of 10 rating for a lot of it, and then it kind of jumps up towards the end. Again, big fan of Negreanu. I really enjoyed seeing him in the featured table, the entire main event, watching this week by week on ESPN. Again, it's on retrospect where it kind of suffers when it's not that new novelty factor to it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, Negreanu as a table presence really helps a lot throughout. Schwartz, sort of his anti-presence helps a lot. And I'd say that, when I saw the final table live, I thought McKeehen was, a little sort of more reticent, not as vocal, not as sort of interesting as a character. But seeing just how much table talk there was throughout the entire season, seeing how he was portrayed, I'd say that I warmed up to him a lot. And he's also had a very good run since the main event. He's won 2 other bracelets. He's clearly shown himself to be a top-notch player. So I definitely
you could argue he's the most successful main event champion after his win of them all, besides maybe like Helmuth, besides that kind of guy, of these last 20 years of the main event, of all those main event winners, he's the most accomplished since then.
Yeah, he seems like a good guy, and I sort of like how his character was built throughout. Beckley, again, not super big presence, but I like that he was a first-timer and shown throughout. Yeah, the November 9 as a whole, with the exception of Chan, I'd say was fairly well developed, so their storylines were carried well. The Side Action Championship, while it wasn't as good as the previous Side Action Championship, I still liked it. I thought it was fine.
It lost its novelty for me, so I didn't care for it that much. But I did like how we had the year of the older player with Newville and Blumenfield at the final table.
Right.
We had, again, some good splashings, like a Sfandiari, Mark Kroon in there to kind of liven things up too. So a lot of good elements, just not the tops of my favorite main events by any means. But again, kind of in between that 2014, 2013 rankings in my overall hierarchy. Maybe how some folks do those like S, A, B, C, D, E, F tiers. I thought we'd do one of those sometime. That could be kind of fun to kind of rank these as we go on, but it'd be kind of in the middle there if you ask me.
Yeah, I think a B would be about right for me in terms of just overall season.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And Joe McKeehen did contribute to the Run It Back with Remco on the Poker Go YouTube channel, so I did rewatch that. And again, he kind of reflects. He understands how fortunate he was to be in this spot when the final table began, and then how lucky he got, or not lucky, but fortunate he got throughout the history of this entire table across those 3 nights of poker, and so he's definitely continuing to expand his poker game. It'd be great if we could see him in a main event coming up in the future, but unfortunately, we don't really see him in the main event for the next 7 years, sadly.
Yeah, and it's also a shame that we don't get much of Schwartz. Some people know out there he was busted with a bong in his hotel room, I think, so he was banned from the casino. Which is, it's a shame. I know that he's had a troubled childhood and sort of had some troubles with the law here and there, but I can't help but like the guy just because of his personality and just the way that he rubs.
I would love to be at a table of Schwartz playing poker.
Yeah.
That'd be so awesome. And unfortunately, we won't have that luxury, but that's okay.
It is okay. Clearly he's the most annoying player of all time. Nobody will ever top him. Nobody ever.
Not possible. Nobody from like Beardlands or England. No way. There's no way anybody will ever come to be that annoying, right? No way.
I'm excited for this. I'm excited for 2016 on a lot of grounds, but I'm excited for what's going to come up.
Well, it's weird because I feel like I'm going to have a vastly different opinion of 2016 rewatching it compared to how I was when I was watching it, because it's going to be total opposites. I'm going to like what I loved last time. I'm going to hate what I liked last time. I love what I hated last time. So it'll be different.
We'll see.
Mr. Will Kassouf has been playing in the circuit events of the World Series of Poker Europe and been playing very well. Actually, he posts on Facebook regularly his accomplishments, so he's still having success at those stakes as we speak. So unfortunately, I tried to get him as a guest star for this podcast. Unfortunately, no success, but maybe next time.
Fingers crossed. Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, guys, thank you for listening to our podcast. Next time we cover the 2016 main events, and it will be the start of 5 consecutive years of growth in the main event field. So we had kind of 6,400 players here. The next 4 main events all grow until they all will reach the top 5 biggest main events fields of the history of the tournament.
Yep, and to give you another reminder, the Mind Sports Olympiad Grand Prix is starting, I think, a week from now. So if you haven't registered yet, go ahead and do so. It's free. They're doing it a bit unusually this year in that they're doing it through the home game sub page on PokerStars. So they're not doing it. They used to do it last year as tournaments. I think they wanted to move to the home game part because non-players of the Olympiad were registering for it. so they're having it only be Olympiad members. There's only like a couple dozen people who are in the homeroom, so who knows? You might have a better chance of winning. I don't know. These guys were pretty good last year, so yeah, I mean, give it a shot. I'll be playing in as many events as I can. I know Ben will be playing in some events.
If I can. I'm having trouble with PokerStars on my computer, downloading, so.
Yeah, I mean, we'll try our best to play as many as we can. Can't promise that we'll play all of them, but we'll try to get mixed up in there.
And so until next time, guys, comment, like, share, subscribe, all that nonsense on social media, and we'll see you next time.
Happy Passover.